being here talking about uphills again. I've over the last few years actually spent a bit of time with them and over down a few places we've been, and I think it's a great thing to be involved with people that have really got a passion for the industry. You're obviously very good at it, and that's why you've got your scholarships and fortune to be able to turn around and further the industry long term. I think is a very important part. One thing I keep saying to many uphill scholars is that it's all very well to be as good as you possibly are as farmers, but if you don't find a way to engage in the agri-political part of it, you'll spend a lot of time fighting with legislation which actually tries to stymie agricultural development in not only in Australia but in New Zealand too, I'm sure. So it's very important that you realise that there are two components to being successful at your business, and one of them is being very good at what you do, and the other one is trying to make sure that you directly provide government policy in a direction that allows you to be good at what you do. Because there's nothing worse than being in a position that you actually can't excel at your profession simply because the legislation that you work on makes it very, very difficult. So, having said that, I was very pleased to get a phone call from Roman not that long ago who rang me up to comment about a statement I've made in the paper one day, and I think it was good to see that people who've got real passion for the industry actually want to get involved in the industry and want to get involved in doing some things. So I think that was the important part. I think it was good to see it coming back in through the numbers, coming back in and wanting to get engaged with the National Farmers Federation and try and drive some of those outcomes. We're here today just for about 15 minutes to talk about some stuff. The other two fellas, Peter and James, will cover off on a lot more technical detail than I will. I'm just a bit rough around the edges, so I'll just give you some of the rough stuff that's going on and they can polish it up. I'm much better off at answering questions than I am standing up speaking. So the whole discussion tonight about I suppose, the global financial crisis in Europe and where it's going and what its implications are. If you sit down and have a think about it, one part of the world sneezes now, and I think we all catch a bit of a cold, and we've seen that on a regular basis over the last 2 to 3 years. If we start just a bit of background about agriculture in Australia, the simple facts are we export about 60% of what we produce. We've got about a 32 billion income coming back out of that, but only about 8% of that goes into the EU. So we're in a position where we don't have, it's not a major market, but the simple confidence in the market over there and the confidence in the economy over there is what is really driving outcomes right across Australia and the world at the moment. So what we need to get out of it more than anything else is, as far as agriculture is concerned, we need very strong, we need to have confidence in the markets around the world. And at the moment, I think since the global financial crisis, without any doubt, we've had a major shift in confidence, and I think we've seen a lot of equity stripped out of the a lot of money stripped out of the equity markets, which we know. And we now see the vulnerability of those equity markets on a regular basis. So whenever a comment comes out of the EU about some of the austerity packages or something, and there's a bit of vulnerability there, then all of a sudden the market will move up and down. So it just shows how much influence statements made by individual politicians overseas can have on the markets in Australia. Now, what that does for agriculture, of course, is it creates real problems. It creates uncertainty in the marketplace. One of the things that Australian agriculture needs more than anything else is it needs certainty in the marketplace and it needs competition in the marketplace. And we, along with the New Zealanders, are very, very exposed to international markets and are in a position where we don't have the government support that many other countries around the world do. So what we need to do is have competition, strong competition in the marketplace. And strong competition comes from countries that have actually got their economies on track and are really dealing with things and dealing with them very well. Other issues, of course, the simplest at the moment are the problems with the Aussie dollar and the Australian economy moving pretty well and being seen around the world as being pretty well, and interest rates fairly high on a international basis is really setting a dollar. I think it's come back to about $1.04 today, but bouncing around between $1 and $1.10, which has created enormous problems for a lot of the processing sector or the exporting sector, and causing a lot of problems for ourselves. And our economists work out that every cent that the dollar goes up, it's about $200 million stripped out of pockets farmgate prices of farmers in Australia. So it gives you an indication about how much sort of money we're talking about, and there's a lot of money. Our concerns when we're dealing with some of the European stuff, as I said before, it's all about having confidence and having people have confidence to be able to go and spend money or be prepared to invest money in different areas. And one of the things that we see at the moment is very much major issues over in a lot of the European countries about our confidence also. I don't know how many of you saw the program on television the other night about Ireland and just the problems that Ireland got. But I mean, they've got major financial issues over there, and I think that's playing right through that section. And there's a real lack of confidence in the whole thing. And there's no doubt that that's flowing through into many of the markets or many of the commodity prices that are there at the moment. We're in a position now with so the problem is with the Europeans, that lack of confidence is really starting to drive and affect markets to a certain extent. Not so much directly, but what we are doing is seeing a lot of the processes we're talking about are going to get access to the markets. First of all, they're having trouble competing because of the price of the dollar, where the dollar's sitting. Secondly, the demand is really starting to struggle, especially on some of the high-end product. A lot of the product we get into the EU, of course, is the higher-end product, higher-end ag product, higher-end cattle product. And I think we've got, about $790 million last year, I think, went into canola oil seeds, $740 million worth of wine. They still like a grog. We've got to get a bit more of that over them. So there's some great opportunities there, but we've got to make sure that they're prepared to go out and spend a bit of time socialising and enjoying to really build those markets up. So that's one of the issues. One of the other real problems is it's all around getting access to finance. Agriculture itself in Australia 10 years ago, I think, owed about $30 billion. It's now about $60 billion. We're regularly hearing how difficult it is to actually source funds out of the marketplace and the cost of sourcing funds in the marketplace. And now we have got that extent of money borrowed in the market and regularly having to re-borrow. A lot of people are looking at paying down debt now. But it really is creating problems in many places around our industry simply because people are finding it far harder to deal with the banks now and actually getting access to that funding. So that's an issue that's come out of that that's really starting to cause some problems. One of the other things that we're seeing in many markets is it's been interesting because right through the global financial crisis, there's been a lot of work done through the Doha round and many other trade negotiation rounds where people are actually looking at breaking down barriers and breaking down tariffs. As soon as the global financial crisis came on, we started to see job losses in many countries because manufacturers were having trouble competing with things. Now all of a sudden we're dealing with countries, the governments are really having trouble trying to figure out how they're going to deal and how they're going to maintain their own economy. So we're seeing in Australia, for instance, the car industry came under immense pressure. We saw the manufacturing industry where they're coming under immense pressure. And we've got the Australian government that's in a position where they're really having a look at how they can maintain those jobs. If you sit down and have a look at spread that right across the rest of the world, in many cases where you're trying to actually remove a lot of tariffs and quotas and barriers to get better access to markets which we need, we've got countries seriously thinking about how they can deal with their own internal issues and save jobs in their own countries. So that's another call out of what's happening in I suppose the lack of confidence overseas, especially over through the EU. So there's some of the concerns, and they're all things that I think can change pretty quickly. We can turn around. I think we saw this week and the effect of the Aussie dollar. I just heard last night. I think that the equity market in America, I think, has risen to about 30% more than the Australian market in the last 2 years. And a lot of that's to do because we're not getting foreign money in. I was talking about. I just don't understand how all that works. I'm not an economist, but there's a lot of issues there that are affecting us in many ways. And I think while commodity prices are reasonably good and reasonably strong on many commodities in Australia at the moment, if you really have a look at that $200 million figure for each cent it goes up, then potentially we've got quite a bit of scope there to put a lot more fat back into the system if things actually turned around. We got the confidence again, our interest rates came back down a little bit, and the dollar came back down a little bit, and we really became far more competitive. A few positives just to finish up on. I think a lot of you would have heard about the ABS conference last week, and the statement they're making that this year will probably be the first time in 30 years where most farming businesses should be in a position where they're making profit. Everything that I'm hearing from people around the place, I would agree. I think there's a lot of confidence out there in the market. It's really good, as I say. If we can just get some of the economies around the world to settle down, then I think just settling down and then just getting a bit of confidence to start going again, I think will really help our industry. I spoke to a bloke from the USDA, economist from the USDA the other day, and he was saying that he believes that where agriculture we've had these little blimps, he believes that we actually could be looking at something that's got a fair bit more sustainability about it. And that's based on the fact that the population will grow enormously, and where we've got to produce about 70% more food by 2050. But the wealth of the population, so in some countries, I think it was in China and Asia, you could have another 200 million people moving up in the middle class and all looking to be eating protein rather than looking at traditional diets, which really gives us some great opportunities. And we get rid of these bloody kiwis, some great opportunities to get over there and get those markets.
They're made in China.
Kiwis.
World Cup was made in China.
We just got to make sure. I mean, we're very competitive and we're good mates of Kiwis. They're not very good at playing football, but they do give us a bit of buggering around in the market, and it's creating some real problems for us. So, but we work together on the Cairns Group. We work together very closely with New Zealand. A lot of our counterparts and Canadians over there, and I think it's important that we spend a lot of our time actually trying to break down these barriers around the world and the quotas around the world, because it's really inflicting a lot of pain back onto our industry. So there's a lot of positive stuff there in Australia, and I'm sure that'll play through into you fellas also. There's a lot of free trade agreements going on. One of the problems we have with the EU, of course, is that they've already done quite a bit of sign up some free trade agreements, Korea being one of those, which puts us at a disadvantage. The problem is that when they're going out with their dollar sitting where it is now, it's becoming very difficult to go out and trade on some of those international markets, to compete on the international markets. And then when countries are then on top of that doing an FTA with certain countries like Korea, for instance, it's becoming even more difficult. For instance, the American FTA that's just been done with Korea, which reduces their tariff down to zero after 15 years, Australia hasn't done an FTA and haven't been able to sign it up. And we're going to stay at about 38% until we sign it up. So we're going to be at a disadvantage all the way through. So it's providing opportunities. That uncertainty in those economies and those weak economies is providing real opportunities for them to get out into our international markets and making it very difficult for us to compete. So we've got to make sure that we continue on with those FTAs and get them done on a international basis. Certainly the FTAs and the TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, pulls a lot of those countries in, and get them to start seriously talking about trade and about dealing with trade in a very serious way. So, look, I really think there's some very positive things, but one of the first things they can do is have governments overseas that can sit down and really manage their economy. That's the trouble they've got at the moment. They're just not exactly sure how in the hell to get them out of the hole they've got themselves in. And I think that's because of technology now. Statements being made overseas are affecting markets right around the world the next day. So it just shows how vulnerable we are. It doesn't matter whether there's any merit to the statement or not. The fact is that statements being made by finance ministers really do create problems for us. And that's an issue that we have in Australia. It's an issue that we're going to continue to have. So the sooner all that settles down, obviously, the better it's going to be for us as an industry. So I'll leave it there and answer any questions afterwards.
Maybe I can simplify that a little bit. I read myself in the Australian the other day. I was shocked to read myself the paper. I do a fair bit at the moment, and there's an article about me that said, here's the bloke that's trying to sell CSG to farmers in New South Wales. He's got the toughest job in the world. I don't know, maybe I do at the moment, but it's why tonight is really important for us. I'm very pleased to be invited to speak. Very pleased to be invited to speak. Ask me all the hard questions afterwards, or during if you like. That's what I'm here for, to ask the tough questions. Look, like the Nuffield Board, Santos really recognises the value of meaningful and honest dialogue between our two industries. Our industries have an incredibly important role to play in the sustainability of this state's and the nation's economic well-being. Natural gas plays a vital role in Australia's economic prosperity. And as Santos, we've historically played that role in this state for over 40 years. We've been delivering gas from Moomba during that period, and we've done it without incident and safely and sustainably during that period. Gas is important for a whole range of things, obviously manufacturing, home heating and cooling, and it's an important part of driving the nation's economy. What's happened now is a large proportion of the future gas reserves are contained within the rich coal seams that underlie valuable agricultural land in this state. So it's very important that we can understand how we can work together to ensure both our industries can be successful. I suppose one thing that I grapple with a lot is arguments. Arguments about that one industry is better than the other, that coexistence is impossible, that food is good and gas is bad. And I personally believe that they are arguments that don't really take us anywhere. It's very important we have a proper dialogue around those things. You know, people say to me, I have these chanting groups come and you can't drink gas, you can't eat coal. Well, of course you can't. But neither can you get food to market without the steel that's needed trucks, tractors, sheds, grain bins and those type of things. Clearly energy is needed and it's an equal part of how we live as firm, and I personally believe we can do these things together. The other thing I face a lot is the talk about renewables, and it's a simple fact of life that as much as we all like to go to renewable energy as quickly as possible, in our lifetime the chances of renewables playing any bigger role than a minority in the energy mix is just not going to happen. It's going to be driven by coal, oil and gas. So that's where our life is. Santos is an energy company. We invest in renewables as well. But we have the view that fossil fuels are really here and they're here for the long term. The first slide I've got here, I suppose, is a slide that to us goes to the heart maybe of some of the questions around today's topic, but also about what's driving the energy paradigm. And this is a photo of the world at night time. And what it shows is you can really see the difference between the two divergent economies. You have the Asian region here, and the US and in Europe, which is big up by energy, and you have the developing nations dark, not that Australia's developing, but and this is what is really driving the energy boom in Australia. Again, just like with agriculture that exports 2/3 of its produce, Australia also exports a large proportion of its energy, and those energy drivers in Asia are hungry for the energy that we have here. So it is something that is a reason why the economies of the US and Europe have really been struggling. Australia has really managed to get its way through the GFC and also the Euro crisis, as well as is because of the back of the resources sector and also the energy business going forward. So where does CSG fit into all this position? A big part of Santos' investment program is our investment in coal seam gas LNG project in Queensland. We have signed contracts for a 20-year period, and on the back of those contracts we'll be generating approximately $100 billion in revenue, which equates to about $6 billion in royalties and about $40 billion in state taxes. I was having a chat to Richard a little while ago about, well, the problem with you guys, you make so much money and it sort of muddies the water. I would like to take that question on notice and we'll have a little chat out later on, but it does show the size of the industry and what it means for Australia's economy. So again, a big theme of what I'm talking about tonight is the importance of our industries being able to work together. That project's created 6,000 jobs in regional Queensland, and again I think investment jobs in regional communities are a very important part of what Santos hopes to bring to New South Wales. It's not just the jobs that we provide. I think one thing we see in a particular place like Roma in Queensland, where we provide many flow-on benefits to goods and services and regional businesses throughout that region. I think when people tour an area like Roma, where Santos has been for 20 years, they do get an appreciation that we are a well-respected member of that community. I suppose the other thing that until a few years ago, not a lot of people even heard of coal seam gas, and it's like it's sort of come up out of nowhere. It's now on the front page of the newspapers, and it surprises people when I tell them that Santos has been producing coal seam gas for nearly 20 years. Indeed, our own company produces nearly 1/3 of the total gas usage required in New South Wales from coal seam gas in Queensland. We've been doing that safely, we've been doing it sustainably, we've been doing it on farms, properties, all that time with no one hearing about it. And I've always thought if we can get a bigger tick for how we go about things at Santos, that message alone should take us through. And again, I'm speaking to Jock, and Jock said that's probably what did you guys in to start with. You probably didn't realise what was going to come down the train at you when the whole gas debate started, and he's right. You know, we've been around for a long time. Santos has been in this country for 40 years. I employ 3,000 people who work in the East Australian coast, in the East Coast business, and we've never had this debate before. We've just gone about our business. So this is something that we've had to come to terms with pretty quickly. Some other stats that we have often surprised people is that 90% of gas in Queensland is coal seam gas right now today. 30% of the gas that's currently used on the eastern seaboard comes from coal seams. So again, this is not a new industry. It's something that's been around for a long time. Given those stats, you hear lots of talks about moratoriums. The industry currently employs in Australia over 20,000 people and it provides all that gas I've just mentioned. If this industry was shut down tomorrow by a moratorium, the consequences for the east coast of Australia would be catastrophic. A large amount of the gas is used by mums and dads in cooking and heating, but half of it is used by manufacturing. So the CSRs, the Vissies, the BlueScope Steels, you'd be shutting these businesses down. So a lot of the talk we hear is very emotive. Of course the country can never afford to do that. The real question is, again, how we go about operating together. Remarkably, in New South Wales, it's really the only state in all of Australia that doesn't have a natural gas business. You import 95% of the gas from other states. Santos has been a very large supplier from the Cooper Basin and from Queensland over the 40-year period. And it's been a very good relationship for both of us. What's changing is that those long-term contracts are rolling off in about 5 years' time. And it will be a more difficult process going forward to renew contracts given the large demand that's coming from these sort of pictures and from the export business, and also from the different ways that the carbon regime is starting to put pressure on where gas is going to be used in other states. And with strong resources industries in those states, there's a real need for gas there. So having your own indigenous gas business is important for the long-term economic future of this state. I suppose the other truth that we talk about, if the state doesn't want to move to more gas, it will mean more coal. Back to my point about there not being a large chance of renewables coming on quickly. And not that I'm here to talk down coal, but more coal means more impact on farms. We argue very strongly, and we'd love to have some Nuffield scholars come and work on some studies with us just to prove that we can coexist with farmers, but clearly open-cut coal mining can't. Open-cut coal mining simply takes away productive land. We believe passionately that the gas is the most natural mix because of its ability to work with farmers. And I suppose that's why I really wanted to come today. I saw my lip here. I had a bit of sickness in the house during the week, and my children have managed to catch a gastro, which managed to knock me out during the process. But I really wanted to come because we need to find a way to have an honest and open dialogue. Too much of the time I spend talking to people with extreme views who don't really want to listen, or I don't really want to listen to them. And what we need to get to is a place where we can have an honest and open. Very happy to be a vigorous discussion, but we need to start listening to each other because I think we will come to learn that we can work well together. And why do I say that? Look, I think you'll find, at least at Santos, that we have a fair bit of common ground. Many people at Santos, the 3,000 I spoke to, half of those people are either from rural backgrounds or they continue to live in regional communities. In my case, I grew up on an irrigation property in the Murray Valley. My father was a third-generation farmer, and my initial university studies were in environmental science and sustainable agriculture. If I'd known about the Nuffield Scholarship, maybe I would have gone down a different path, but I ended up going down the scientific path and eventually doing law. But it is, we do understand the issues that you face. A large group of geologists and drillers and our land access people are all from rural backgrounds. So what are the issues around CSG? I'm sitting there saying, that's all great, James. You haven't said anything about the concerns that we've got. And I know the three concerns that the people in these communities have. They're about land access, they're about protection of water, and they're about, does this industry actually add value to the communities that it's going to become involved in? So let me quickly start with water. Let me quickly start with land access. In New South Wales, the team responsible for establishing and managing our landholder relationships is led by Mark Rogers, who's with me tonight. Mark's been breeding cattle in the area for 40 years. and obviously Mark has a very strong interest in ensuring that we do the right thing. Mark reminds us every day that it's an unusual thing to have other people come on to properties that you've been farming for generations, and we understand that, and it's something that we take great care in being sensitive about. It's important that I reassure you that just because I've got an exploration licence, it does not give me the unfettered right to come onto your land uninvited, or indeed at the end of the day to not reach an agreement with you about how and where and what I do on your property. That is a basic tenet that we have right through our company, from the chairman down. We will not go through lock gates. We will not take you to court to force our rights onto your land. Absolutely. I've made that comment a number of times at the Senate inquiry, and I've done it many times. So I'm very happy to put that in writing. We also understand that just as the taxpayers have their rights to royalties and taxes, that you guys have the right to fair compensation. And I welcome the opportunity to talk to you at the right time about fair compensation for any involvement on the land I have in your areas. Again, putting that in context, we have had some very good discussions with landholders. We currently have access arrangements with some 200 landholders in Queensland and some 50 in New South Wales. And we work with them on a daily basis and work together with them during their agricultural enterprises. Let's very quickly talk about water, because I know this is actually probably the number one issue around. Given the chance, I'd like to take you to Queensland and show you what we've done there, show how we can operate, show how that indeed where we extract the water from is deep from the earth, hundreds of metres below the shallow aquifers. But before I talk about that, I'd just like to talk about the volume of water. Again, something that gets lost a fair bit in the discussion. In the Namoi catchment area, the Murray-Darling Basin Commission estimated the annual average water usage in the area is some 540 gigalitres per annum, which, to give that a bit of a number, that's about how much water there is in the Sydney Harbour. Today in the Namoi area, there's some 19,000 registered water bores. By comparison, over the next 3 years, Santos has announced that we plan to spend about $500 million drilling 50 wells to get the science to prove that we can operate a commercial field in this state. Even when we're in full production, our estimate is that we'll have well less than 1,000 wells in total in the state for our project. So when you hear these claims about thousands and thousands of wells, it's simply not true. That's not in our plans. Simply about how much water we use. We try to put this chart up to show that at full production we will be using approximately 5 gigalitres per annum, so 1% of the current water usage. So we say that it's not the volume of water that should be a concern. Even the water we use, as we do now in Queensland, we will put that to beneficial use. We will purify it and we'll supply it to local farmers to use. We can inject it into surface aquifers to be used again. And we work with many areas now. I think we've got a picture here, Sam, of this is a trial station we're using up here, where we have an RO plant that's providing water to a local landowner up there. That fellow there is Mark McFarlane, who's the guy in the middle bringing the toxic CSG water onto a fodder crop, and that's something we're doing right now. So these are things that we are actually doing right at the moment. The other thing I really want to quickly touch on is well integrity. It's one thing to say we don't use very much water, and the water we do use we can give back to the community. The other issue is will you contaminate the surface aquifers, and will you bring up nasties that you can't control. This is a relatively cartoon, but I think it lays the picture is that the area where the farmers use is in the top 100 metres. This area up here. We target coal seams down here. So we're at the 800 to 1,000 metre level. We do a lot of testing. That's the reason we do core holes first. The reason we do pilot testing before we do any production is to establish that there is impervious rock. Some 600 metres between what we do and what you do.
Where's the Great Artesian Basin in that corner?
So the Great Artesian Basin is a a bit of a mythical thing how people think about it. They think about the basin as some underground sort of tank of water. What it does though is actually it's contained in lots of different aquifers throughout there. Generally it's in this top 200 metres. It does change a lot because the whole area faults right through obviously the east coast of Australia, so you get peaks going up and down. But generally the Artesian Basin is where people draw the water bore from, in the top 200 metres.
Not New South Wales.
Well, where it comes from New South Wales, it actually doesn't come through a lot. It comes right through the top of there. It's probably about 80 k's north of Gunnedah where it dives through there. But again, we know a lot about the Artesian Basin because it goes right through Queensland and South Australia, and we've been drilling through it for 40 years. So I can give you some detailed maps on the depths of it, but it's not one contiguous level of the Artesian Basin. It carries lots of different aquifers that are separated. But we are not drawing water from the Artesian Basin. The reason we don't draw water from the Artesian Basin is because the only reason you can release a coal from here is if you can release the pressure from the water. The Artesian Basin is so massive that if there was connections in that coal seam, the gas would never get released because you'd never release the pressure. And it's a very important point. Fracking is a very good question. Santos has been fracking for many, many years. I actually don't cover fracking in this topic because it is a lengthy discussion. To give you some stats, there's been one... At the moment, New South Wales government has got a moratorium on fracking, so Santos is not fracking in this state, and we're working with the chief scientist. So before we would be any fracking in this state, we would work with the chief scientist to ensure that it can be done safely and sustainably. No, so there's no fracking in this state. And we won't be doing it until obviously we're approved to do so. Look, it's a very hot topic. It's something that we need to, again, spend some time talking about because fracking has been demonised and understand why, and it's something that we just need to spend a bit of time talking about. So I've mentioned a bit about integrity. You hear a lot about also what happens after you've gone and you've got these wells in the ground. How do you ensure that what you leave behind is safe? There are processes where we plug these wells with cement. It's very high-grade cement, and the cement that we leave behind is stronger than the rock that's in place to ensure that when we leave, there's no possibility of leakage happening between those wells. Now, I'm giving a very high-level cursory review. If people like to talk to me afterwards about how that process works, I'm very happy to give that example. So I've probably overtaken my time here, but in conclusion, obviously we firmly believe that there can be a fit between natural gas and farming in this region. It's important for a number of reasons, putting aside energy security, but again, from a regional investment point of view, if our project were to proceed as we would like, it would boost the state's economy by about $870 million per annum. There, 470 million of that would go into the regional New South Wales. We would create in the order of 2,900 jobs in the regional communities. These aren't jobs just in the gas business. These are real people and real jobs providing services to the industry. And with that, obviously, comes more teachers, more hospitals, more public transport options as well.
What's the average wage, James, that Santos is paying all the young people that would normally work in these rural communities?
Yeah, we're obviously offer high skilled jobs. These are people who are earning between $70,000 and $120,000 a year.
How do you think Santos and agriculture can sustainably coexist when we can't compete in wages to the likes of what the mining companies in the areas?
Yeah, I think what you've seen in Queensland, what happens there is you get a lot of people moving into the state. So at the moment there's a sort of a net flow of people out of New South Wales to to go into Queensland. So when we've done this work, what we see is that we see people coming in to backfill those jobs.
And the rural communities?
Rural communities, I think a town like Gunnedah will benefit from having the money flowing in from the high-paying jobs. Again, hopefully your children can, rather than having to move to Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide, those jobs can stay at home in those regional townships and set up their families there. This is the discussion we need to have about how that works. But the difference between New South Wales and Queensland is that there are 4 large projects going on in Queensland. In Gladstone is going through some growing pains with the number of jobs that are too many jobs in Gladstone in some degree. Places like Gunnedah and Narrabri, to some degree Santos needs to go at a steadier pace to make sure that doesn't happen. So thank you for the question. Look, I do appreciate being here. I can tell there is a lot of heat around this topic. I do welcome the challenge. I do welcome the opportunity. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that introduction. I really want to thank you for the opportunity of speaking here this evening. As Richard's pointed out, I have no vested interest here this evening. I speak as a private citizen, so you have the opportunity of me waxing lyrical about my opinions for the next 19 minutes, is it? 8:55. I've got to make sure I'm done by 8:55. I think the topic this evening was the Eurozone crisis and its impact on rural Australia. Let me give you my conclusion now. I don't believe that there is any substantial impact of the Eurozone crisis on either the success or long-term success or long-term failure of the rural industry in Australia. I guess I should earn my tapas sharing back by giving you a few reasons as to why I say that. Before I do, let me just start with a little anecdote I heard recently. Can you tell me what the definition of optimism is? It's a Greek banker that irons 5 shirts on a Sunday evening. So let me start a little bit with Europe. If I was to ask me to speak at this kind of event, I would have asked me to speak about Asia Pacific and its potential impact on rural Australia, because I think that might be a more important topic to discuss, but maybe that's for the next tour. But seeing as we're talking about Europe this evening, let me give you a little bit of background to what's going on there on the basis of my experience of living there for 5 years, working with Australian businesses over there, and having been, since I returned to Australia, a bit of a scholar about what is continuing to happen with the evolution of the European financial system. Unfortunately, I have to start with a little bit of history and political and geographic lesson. Europe, as you would know, is an agglomeration, affiliation, collaboration of 27 countries, 27 sovereign nations. It represents at this moment a market that outputs 12 trillion euros of economic value. I don't know whether you know how much that money that really is, but it's a 12 with lots of zeros behind it. In addition, it's a market of 500 million people, which are relatively affluent. In fact, on average, more affluent than Australians. It imports from outside the EU, 27, each year, 1 trillion euro of product. That is, at today's exchange rate, 1.5 times the total economic output of Australia. So it's a freaking big market. A subset of the European Union is the Eurozone group, which is 17 markets that share the euro as their currency. This in itself is a market that is 300 million people and generates about 12 trillion euro of, 10 trillion euro. So about, what's that, about 90% of the economic value of the total EU is generated by the 17 Eurozone countries. That's a pretty big market in and of itself. To join the Eurozone, to be one of the club members, you have to negotiate with the other club members. but the way in which the Eurozone is run is by a confederation of 17 central banks, 17 reserve banks, if you like, plus one European Central Bank. So 18 different financial institutions manage the Eurozone. You can imagine, well, maybe you can't, but if you try hard, if you imagine trying to navigate the political circumstances of 17 sovereign nations and 17 central banks to get a decision about when they're going to do something, anything, change the toilet paper supply, that takes a long time. So you're working in a very complex and politically constrained environment, a lot of competing influences, and in some cases widely divergent opinions about what it is that should be the right thing to do. As you join the Eurozone, you get given a rule book, a guideline book, about how you need to behave as part of the Eurozone club. A couple of those rules are that, for example, your deficit, government deficit to GDP ratio needs to be less than 3%. And your government debt to GDP needs to be less than 60%, or visibly improving. Given that I made a joke about Greece earlier on, I'll just use Greece as an example. Remember the 10% number? The 3% number, the 3% deficit to GDP? Greece is currently running at 10%. It has been running at 16%, by the way, so they're actually improving. Just as an aside, Ireland is running at 31% against 3% target. On the government debt to GDP ratio, the target is 60%. Greece is currently 145%. So that gives you some sort of scale as to how far Greece has moved outside the benchmarks or the guidelines. And remember the 17 banks and one central bank that should be part of the management process? Well, they actually don't have any right to tell Greece what to do. There's no statute, no governing rules or guidelines that says that Greece has to actually do what the ECB or the EU says it has to do. It's a bonding of common mutual interest. We all in this together, so we'll all play by the same rules. Unfortunately, just like some housekeepers are better than others, Greece has not been a good housekeeper. And so it's maxed out the credit cards in a pretty significant way. And now the banks are coming calling. There's no more credit cards to go around, and the banks want their money. So at this moment, what the Eurozone is facing is the fact that Greece, a small country, 800 million euro is its economic output. So what was that against 10 trillion? Probably 1%, 2% of the economic output of the EU, has now got all of the other members of the EU striving to go to the cookie tins to find enough money to help them pay off their bank cards. They've already given them 135 billion euro last year. That didn't help a lot. They're giving them another 137 billion euro at the moment. The bad news is that even though they've given them that 200 and whatever it is, 60 billion euro, billion, real money, they reckon that even now they don't know whether that's going to help. And the estimate is there's at least as much more they need to get out of the cookie tins to help. And even then, the 145% government debt to GDP ratio in 10 years will only come down to about 130%. So at this moment, who's got the problem? Has Greece got the problem? Has the rest of the Eurozone got the problem? Have the bankers got the problem? Have the rest of the world got the problem? Well, in fact, the answer is everybody's got the problem. And at this moment, I think it was Jock that said, they don't know what to do. Well, I think they do know what to do, but they're just scared about saying what it is. So at the moment, everyone's saying, no, we can't let Greece is one of our brothers, we can't let them go, we can't let them default, they're part of the family, we have to help them. Part of the European ideal, we all have to hang together. Because if the weakest goes, what happens to the next weakest? We have to let them go, and then the next one, and then the next one. And I don't think anyone agrees at this moment that the fragmentation of the Eurozone is a good thing. But that would be the natural implication of letting the weakest member fall off the edge of the perch at this moment. So everyone says we need to make sure that this does not happen. And so the Eurozone is coming to Greece and saying, right, well, we'll give you the money, but you need to do all of this really tough stuff. And unfortunately, two things are happening. The people who are helping actually are copping a heap of political flack at home. When I was in Germany, when times were relatively good, there were German taxi drivers who would complain to me all the time about how Germany was paying for the rest of Europe and how prices had gone up and it was a terrible thing and we shouldn't be in the Eurozone and blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine what they're talking about now? All these lazy Mediterraneans, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Greeks, we're paying for all of their, poor housekeeping. At the same time, in Greece, there's riots on the streets. Why would that be? They're getting the free money, right? Well, it's not free. One of the austerity measures that the Eurozone is requiring of Greece is that over the next 10 years, each of the next 10 years, Greece reduces its public sector by 15,000 jobs per annum. 150,000 jobs out of the public sector in the next 10 years. Could you imagine that happening in Australia? There'd be blood on the streets. So this wonderful bond of common interest that is holding things together like chewing gum at the moment, there is a theory that goes around at this moment that says, well, common interest is only good as long as it's in your self-interest. And unfortunately, the pain that is about to accompany the common interest is not worth the gain. No one can see the gain. The next 10 years, they don't even believe that Greece can do what it is that the Eurozone's asking them to do. And even then, it'll only get them back to, what did I say before, 129% GDP to debt to GDP ratio. So why the hell would we go through all of this pain now? So where we're at this moment in time, what's going to happen next? Well, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I'd be putting my money on a Greek default sometime soon. So Greece will not pay its debts at some moment. Could be next week, could be in 6 months' time, who knows. But where Europe is trying to go at the moment, and everyone's positioning around at this moment, is to have it be an orderly default. How the hell you can have an orderly default, I don't know. But in any case, an orderly default will be one in which the bondholders that that Greece owes money to will be negotiated with. They'll get agreement with the bondholders, which are largely the banking system in Europe. They'll have an orderly transition. They'll signal to the market for several months before that they're not going to take up another package, that they're not going to agree to various measures. That message will gradually become stronger and stronger, and at one moment the Europeans will cut the cord. So that Greece will default, they'll go back to their own currency, they'll devalue, they can print money, they can pay off their bills, they can start becoming more competitive again because they've got a low exchange rate rather than this strong thing called the euro, and they can do what they need to do to get their house in order. And meanwhile, the Europeans can put their money back in their pocket and save it for another day when they have to bail out Italy or France or Spain, which will be the next thing. So, that being the case, what's the implications for Australia? Well, frankly speaking, the industry in Australia, and I include rural Australia in this, agriculture, mining, rural business of any other type, frankly speaking, has more problems at home than it does abroad. At this moment, and Jock mentioned the number, 8% of agriculture's exports go to the European market. If the European market tomorrow declines by 10%, okay, so Australia's exports to the European Union will be 7% or 6%. Right? So that's not going to make or break rural Australia, I don't believe. What the problem potentially may be is that if, the Europeans get a cold and suddenly in a doomsday scenario, 20% of the economic value of Europe falls away, they start importing 20% less, then what that means is that the North American and the Chinese markets get a pneumonia, because Europe is an export market for China and North America. If economic output declines in China and North America, especially China at the moment, guess what happens? We get the flu. Because regardless of whether we like it or not, at this moment in time, and the saviour success has many fathers. The GFC seems to be getting claimed as a success by every industry sector at this moment, as well as the government. But fundamentally, Australia's bacon was saved by the commodities boom in the mining sector in the last 5 years. And so that was largely driven by China. If China goes and the mining industry goes south from here, guess what happens? The government captures less revenue from taxing the mining industry. I'm not an advocate for the mining industry, by the way, but the government gets less revenue from taxing the mining industry. That starts to flow through to tight credit for the rest of Australian business and tight market times for whoever's trying to make money, whether that's in rural Australia or urban Australia. So, what should we do from here on? Well, frankly speaking, as I already said, I think there's more structural problems here in Australia that we can work on, and as Jock said, we should be advocates for how we should be able to execute the excellence that is available in business in rural Australia as well as urban Australia. But I have been an advocate more strongly over the last 5 to 10 years to get off our asses, excuse my vernacular, and get over there and start doing business. Australian business in the global marketplace is one of the most risk-averse and conservative business communities in the world. We are fantastic innovators at home, and we have no capacity to take that innovation to the world stage and commercialise it on a grand scale. We are more content to sit at home and satisfy the New England Northwest, only because I'm standing here in Armidale, than we are to seek markets in China or Slovakia or Portugal or Canada, as the case may be. The European Union, as a market, I said before, imports more than 1.5 times the total output of the Australian market every year. If that's not a goddamn opportunity, I don't know what is. And they are smart people. They know innovation when they see it. They know good value when they see it. They know good relationship managers when they see it. And they're willing and open to do business. And in fact, they have to do business because their markets have gone as far as they can go. They need ideas, they need innovation from other parts of the world, and they need brains like the people in this room, frankly speaking, to bring that kind of innovation to huge market, huge opportunity, much greater opportunity than there is threat at this moment, in my opinion. So, to just close on one final quote from the great American writer Jack London, if you're lacking in inspiration, you can't wait for inspiration to come up and grab you. You have to go out and meet it with a club. Thank you very much.